I think we've covered all the rest of the techniques also, except for user stories. All the other documentation techniques are done, right? This is what we need to start now. Okay, so let's go ahead with this. Today and maybe the next 1-2 sessions would focus on user stories. So user stories is a way of documenting requirements in using Scrum model. Okay. Scrum is one of the agile methodologies. Okay, so before we get into user stories, let's get that context of what agile is, what Scrum is, and how do we capture the requirements in user stories. That is how we would follow it. Right now, broadly, agile is a group of techniques which differ from the orthodox way of your software development lifecycle. Now, the underlying principle of agile is that they are inefficient. Right? So you spend a lot of time in non-productive activities by documenting or by reviewing, and all this time could have been more productively used by actually designing and developing the system, right? So that is a major underlying principle of agile. So what they say is that if we have done our if you're focused on these activities, we could actually have saved a lot of time and effort. Okay, so they try to identify the loopholes or drawbacks in the traditional SDLC lifecycle and address them in the agile. Right now, there are multiple techniques which came up in agile. Like there is a pair programming, extreme programming, then you have dynamic system development models. And the most popular one among them is the Scrum model. Okay, so it became so popular that Agile and Scrum model are taken synonymously these days. Right? So at least most of the people who don't have a good understanding think that Agile is Scrum and Scrum is Agile. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll focus on the Scrum model today, because that is the most important one, and that's a full-fledged one, right? It starts from the requirements till the development and design and testing. Unlike the other agile techniques, which are focused only on one phase of the project, like if you pick up a pair programming or extreme programming, they're only focused on the development part, right? So, and that's one of the reasons for agile being very popular. Okay, so it's well accepted, and it's a full-fledged model, right? So you can actually execute end-to-end projects using an agile Scrum model. Okay, so we'll first understand how the Scrum model works, and then we would learn about how do we capture the requirements in a Scrum model, and also understand what are the advantages, the challenges, and the best practices in a Scrum model. Right? So that's what would our focus would be. Okay. Now this slide summarizes about the steps involved in a Scrum model. Right. Now, so a typical project, what would have been there? There would have been a requirements phase. So there would have been a planning phase. There would be a requirements phase. There would be a design phase, coding, and testing. Right? So this is how a waterfall model would be. Let's say each of these activities takes a month. So it would take totally it would have taken 5 months. Right? So 1 month here, 1 month here, 1 month here, 1 month here. I'm just taking it for the hypothetical situation to bring out the advantages of Scrum model, right? So since you're doing one after the other, first 1 month you will plan, next 1 month you will understand requirements, next 1 month you will design, next 1 month you will do the programming, and last month you will test it out, right? Now Agile doesn't go in this sequential manner, right? So that helps in saving time and money, right? How we do that, I'll explain that. Right, but first let's understand the process. Okay, so once the project is identified, so okay, there's a set of projects that you could take up. You've created a business case. You've gone through the senior management. They've approved the budget. Okay, so the budgets are approved. So this is the stage where you'll start the planning. So what you do is you first identify the high level features and then prioritize them, right? So what we were doing in a typical waterfall model was we'll create a detailed plan saying that we'll have first 1 month we'll have all the requirements captured and then go on to the design. Now we are not doing that here. We are first prioritizing all our requirements. So if there are, let's say, 20 features in the system, right? So what we do is we first prioritize our requirements. Okay. So if there are 20 features, you'll say, all 20 are not important to me. Let's say you'll break them into 4 different buckets, right? So type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Okay. Type 1 are the most important ones, which are very, very important for you, right? Then type 2 are less important compared to type 1. Type 3 are still lesser, and 4 is the least most important ones, right? So broadly of these 4 set of requirements. Now what Agile would do is it will not capture the complete requirements into the BRD, right? So which we have done and created a BRD here, right? So it's not capturing all the requirements, because see, all of them are not important for me. So what I would do is I just pick up the top most important ones, right? So the top 4 or 5 requirements I'll pick it up and then go through the complete iteration of requirements, design, development, and testing, right? We call this as a sprint. Okay. So the topmost requirements are picked. So it could be, and the sprint duration is usually in 2 to 3 weeks, right? So you don't keep it longer, right? So whatever features you can develop in those 2-3 features, you'll just pick those which are most important and then go through the complete requirements, design, development, and testing, right? That is called as a sprint. So by the end of it, you have a working system which has those top 4 or 5 requirements developed, and that is at the end of the 2-3 weeks, right? So you don't have to wait like 5 months to complete it. So by the end of 2-3 weeks, all your most important requirements are actually developed, are there for the end users to actually see and then provide feedback. Okay, so they would look at it and then say, what, we could have improvised this by having an additional features, or we could have done it in a different way. So they'll give their suggestions. Okay, those suggestions would be taken to reprioritize your features, right? Now let's say for the simplicity's sake, let's say there are 20 features and we have broken down 5 features in each sprint. Okay, so the topmost sprint we have picked up 5 features and then we developed it, and the feedback came and then say, now 2 features you can do it in a better way, right? And one of them is an important one and one of them is not so important. So what do you do in this next features? You'll move one feature down and then add the important feedback onto this and then pick up the next for the second sprint, right? So effectively, you have faster feedback. Feedback is coming much faster in a Scrum model, and once the user starts looking at the product, they'll have much more clarity onto the requirements, and then they would the feedback would be much more productive, right? Even if you have created those prototype screens and all, unless they use it, they might not get to understand the intricacies, right? So that's one of the major advantages of Scrum model. So it gets the real-time feedback from the users, right? So you'll keep continuing these sprints, and once you get a decent version which can use it for your actual work, right? So this is still at a demo stage. I mean, which are allowing the users to use it, but just as a dummy system. You're not allowing it to do their actual work onto it, right? So once you have a decent features, like all those features which can be released into the production environment, which can be given access to the end users, you take it into the production environment. You release it to the end users and then say, okay, now you start using it, As and when we have another better version, we'll give another new release, version 1.1 or version 2.0, whatever it is, right? So that is how an agile works. Okay, so that's a major thing, right? So you're not doing all the requirements and everything one after the other, right? You're doing that in smaller batches. We call it as sprints, right? In a way, it is similar to iterative model, right? But there are a lot of differences between iterations and Scrum model, right? So iteration, you are saying one module, one phase, and then doing it. But here, the requirements itself are prioritized, and the requirements could be across different modules. We still need to understand how an iteration goes and how do we document the requirements. But broadly, is this process clear? Broadly, if you have to summarize this slide, you will have the set of requirements, which you will prioritize them based on the priority of the requirement. Whatever is most important, you will take up in the first iteration, and the least important one goes into the last iteration. Then you typically keep the size of the sprint to 2-3 weeks, which means whatever you can do in that 3 weeks time, you're just picking up only those requirements. So let's say you can do it only 5 requirements, you'll pick only 5. You could do 3 only, you'll pick only those 3 in that iteration. Okay. Then during this process, you'll do the requirements, you'll do the design, development, and testing, right? And a lot of them are not sequential; they are simultaneous. How do we execute in a sprint? I'll explain that later, right? So this the features are developed, and then the feedback is taken, which goes and updates your prioritization of the requirements as well. And once you have a decent version with maybe 2-3 sprints done, then you would release it into your final production environment, which means you're giving a new version to the final thing, right? So that is how an agile works, right? So the most important advantage here is that you save in a lot of time and money, because you're focusing on the most important requirements, and activities happen simultaneously, not sequentially, right? So we will look how that happens as well. The main drawbacks or challenges would be, there's no change management process, right? Or at least the users are allowed or empowered to take decisions regarding the change request. So they can suggest any change, and then once the team decides that they're going to implement, they'll do it, right? So the team themselves are designing what changes to take up and they're not dependent on some senior management or some reviews for approving a change request. So you're cutting down on all that bureaucratic activities. Okay, so let's spend some time first understanding how this product backlog works. Right? So how do we prioritize our requirements? Okay, and then we'll go into each step, but then we'll get into the iteration and then see how do we execute it and carry out this development in that sprint. Okay, so that way we'll get more clarity. So first, let's spend time on our prioritization requirements. We call this as a product backlog. That is a term which is used. There are a lot of terminology specific to Scrum model. Like there is a sprint, there is a Scrum master, then there is a product backlog, right? So there is a user story, then there is an epic, right? A lot of them are there. We'll learn all of them, right? So one after the other. For now, let's. The first step is we'll prioritize our requirements. Why? Because not all requirements are important. The most important one we will develop that in the first initial 2-3 weeks or in the first sprint, right? So that way, our focus is on the most important requirements, which is giving us a lot more value than all the requirements together, right? I'll explain those slides later, but first let's understand onto the prioritization. Okay, now so we define a user story, something which is a piece of functionality or some behavior which is of use to the end user, right? So all your features can be considered as a user story. So if you pick up a mobile banking app, maybe you're transferring your funds or checking account balance or payment of bills. This can be considered as user stories. Logging into the system can be considered as features or some piece of functionality that you want to get. Okay, so your product backlog is a prioritization of these features. Now, which is the most important feature in your mobile banking app that you want? Maybe I would say I want to check account balance and transfer funds. Those two are most important. Then what? Maybe login feature, because that without that I cannot even release it to the end users. Right? Maybe you're paying of bills, or maybe buying stuff like booking of movie tickets and all can come in later. They're not so important to me. Right? So overall, I'm prioritizing my requirements. And where is this prioritization coming from? From the business users. Right? So they would help. So how is that process carried out, and how do we capture that details? Everything. Let's understand. Okay. So the list of all user stories or all features is called as a product backlog, and then you prioritize them to have the most important ones at the top of it, and the least important ones at the bottom of the backlog. How do we go about it? So how creating the product backlog? First step, we would create a workflow of all those features or functionality that needs to be delivered. So what you do is you'll pick up the broader or the high level activities and then create a workflow out of it. Like let's say a typical system maybe would have a registration process, and then maybe a order placement process, and then maybe a payment process and delivery, right? And finally some reporting. Okay, so broadly I've identified the various features. Now within each one of them, like when you're like making a payment, right? So payment can be made by multiple methods. You could pay it by credit card, you could make it by debit card, or through your bank account, or maybe you could make the payment by cash and delivery, right? Or you could give a check. So there are multiple ways, right? Each of them there would be some slight differences, but overall that's the broader functionality. So you would first make this workflow or the visual value chain of what are all the high-level features that your system is offering, right? So you'll have this value chain coming out. Once you have this, then what do you do is you would break down this high-level user story into smaller ones. Sometimes we also call this as an epic. Okay, some project teams call this as epic. Some call this as larger user stories. Either one is fine. Epics or user stories, bigger user stories is what will come out. Right. So now you have the visual value chain of what the system should deliver. Then what do? We drill down further and then break this down into smaller user stories. Okay. So all that is done as part of your product backlog. Okay. So first step, you are arranging all the activities in a line, usually if possible in a time bound manner, but it need not be in a time bound chronological order, right? So but if you can do that, right? So sometimes some of those activities could be simultaneous or not related on time, but you can place. So broadly what we are doing is at a high level we are figuring out what all features the system should deliver. Okay, then we break down each one of them into smaller ones. Okay, now if you see, this is a high level activity and there are 5 different smaller user stories for this epic, right? Similarly for this epic there are again 5. Okay, for this epic there are 4 user stories in it. Okay, now you see the definite pattern in that, right? So some of them are stacked vertically, some of them are stacked horizontally, right? How should we do that? Right? So there is a small logic to it, very simple logic. Now if you pick up a user story, let's say this one, okay? Now this has 3 steps in it, 1, 2 and 3. So you have to complete all 3 steps for this task to complete. for this user story to complete, for this epic to complete, we are breaking down into 3 user stories, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so if they are horizontally stacked, it means they have to be done one after the other, which means they have to be done, right? So it's 1, then 2, then 3, right? So all 3 steps have to be done for this epic to complete. Okay, but some of these steps or smaller user stories can be done in multiple ways, right? So it can be done in 2.1 or 2.2, right? So something like, let's say, your payment can be made by a credit card or a debit card. Okay, so if both there are 2 options, then one becomes 2.1 and second becomes 2.2. So we can make the payment by this method or this method. So R is a keyword, which means this step 2 can be done in one of these ways. You don't need to do all of this. It's only one of them which you will use, which are vertically stacked. Okay, so you understand this logic?
The vertical, like task happening at the same time, goes vertically, and what do you mean by it?
No, not happening at the same time. You can do this task in one of these ways. Like you can make a payment by credit card or debit card, right? Either way, let's say 2 is make payment. Okay, now payment, how can I do it? I can make it by credit card or I can make it by debit card, right? Either way I can make it, but you won't do it 2 times. You won't use the same for you won't use both of them for making a payment, right? So only one of them is used. Only one of them is used. So there are options of performing this task. Okay, so you can choose one of them to perform step 2. Okay, so that's the reason we call it as R, right? I'll do it by 2.1 or 2.2. Okay, so only one of that method is one of those options is used to complete that user story, right? But if it's stacked horizontally, this means all 3 of them have to be done, right? So step 1 could be maybe registration or order placement. Step 2 is payment, and step 3 is, let's say, confirmation or receipt. Okay, I'm just taking some example. So you will first place the order, then you would make the payment. Now payment can be made by credit card or debit card. Okay, so you use one of this, and then you would get a receipt for it. Okay, so all 3 steps are done, but step 2 can be done in one of these 2 ways. Now this receipt can be sent to you by email, let's say, or maybe sent by a hard copy courier. Right? So 3.1 is by email, receipt is sent by email, and 3.2 is by a physical copy. Right? So even 3 can be done in 2 ways. Right? So the way it would work is you will make the order. There is only one way of placing the order. Then you will pay by credit card, and then you will get a receipt by email, right? Or you will make a order, then you will make by payment by debit card, right? Then you will get the receipt by email, right? So all these options are possible. Now then there would be, you will make an order, you could make a payment by credit card, and then you will get the receipt by physical copy, 3.2. Right? Similarly, there would be one more option. One, you will make the payment by debit card, then you will get a payment by 3.2. Right? So you get it by physical copy. Right? So you all these 4 combinations are possible, because each of them have to do different steps. So overall you're figuring it out. Okay, payment I can make it in 2 ways, receipt I can send it in 2 ways. So all those, whatever you can do in multiple ways, you're stacking them vertically. Okay, and whatever are mandatory steps or have to be done, they are stacked horizontally. Now, is that clear? Is it making sense now?
Yes.
Okay, very simple logic, right? Step 1, 2, 3, and then 2 can be in two ways, done in two ways. So you'll have this 2.1, 2.2 stacked horizontally. Otherwise, it's all sorry, 2.1, 2.2 stacked vertically. Otherwise, it's all horizontal. Okay. Now this is what we do. Now we have all those detailed work. It's similar to a work breakdown structure, right? So what have we done? We have broken down that requirement or features into smaller ones. And then we have a detailed work breakdown structure kind of thing now. Okay. Now which is a little more organized rather than just a list of activities. Then what we do? Then we would prioritize them. Now, what is the first few things that I want? Right? So maybe I don't want both the options to be given in the first version. If you give me a payment by credit card, since most of my payments are done through credit card, like let's say 80%, I'll just develop the payment by credit card first and then do this at a later point. So first release, I'll just give you only by payment by credit card and receipt by email. Okay. So this way, I'm picking up the most important ones, right? So the most important ones are 1, 2.1 and 3.1, so which I'll plan it in first release. Then I could say 2.2 and 2.3 I can have it in second release, right? And some other requirements which are there in release 3. So across these epics or higher user stories, we are picking up the most important ones, and you'll pick up only that ones which you can do in that 3-week time window. Okay, in that particular sprint. Okay, that is the process which you'll follow. Okay, so once you have the list of all requirements, you would prioritize them. So whatever is in this bucket, right? Whatever you're seeing here are the most important ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 features are there in sprint 1. Right? Let's call it as sprint 1. Right? So sprint 1 would deliver these 7 features. Then sprint 2 would deliver the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 features. Right? Similarly, sprint 3 also would deliver the next 8 features. Okay, so out of those 27, 28 features that user stories that you had, you're broken down into 3 sprints. The first sprint delivering the most important 7 user stories. Sprint 2 delivering the next important 8 user stories, and sprint 3 delivering the least important 8 stories. Okay, so by the end of the prioritization exercise, you will have a product backlog with a clear-cut schedule of what features are delivered in which sprint. Clear about this part? Are we clear about how do we go about preparing the product backlog and all? What we did here is we understood about the first step. Right? So the product backlog is created. Okay. So then what? Now we have those 7, 8 features that we'll have to deliver. Right? How do we deliver those 7, 8 features? Okay. That goes through the iteration. Okay. Now how does an iteration happen? I'll explain that. So what happens in a sprint, and what do you do, and what do the others do? We'll look at it as well. Okay. So ideally, another important thing I forgot to mention is your requirements in an agile model are not captured in a detailed BRD. So there is no business requirements document which is prepared. Why? Because we don't want to waste time on documentation and all those review activities. So we'll just keep it to the minimum, and the requirements are captured in a post-it note. Right? So you'll have those postcard sized post-it notes. Your requirements are generally captured like this. right? So you just have post-it note and the requirement is captured only in that, right? So there is no BRD which is prepared, there is no detailed documentation which is prepared. All you have is just a list of post-it notes stick onto a whiteboard, right? Which you'll use for both creation of your product backlog as well as capturing your requirement also. So the whole requirement is captured only in this post-it size, postcard size post-it note, right? So that's all what you're doing to capture your requirement. Okay. So that's basically is how your requirements are captured in an agile, right? How do we do it? Anyway, we'll learn that. But I think I should have mentioned this earlier, which I missed out. Okay. So now clearly you'll have this list of 7-8 features that you have identified, right? So let's say this is sprint 1, and 4, 5, 6, 7 features are there. So ideally your dashboard or your whiteboard on your in the room where your project is being executed out of would have something like this, right? So like to start, work in progress, and completed. Right? So that's perfect. Okay. So all those 7 post-it notes will be pasted here. 6, 7. Right. So there are 7 features that we need to develop. Okay. Now ideally, what we have done in a waterfall model is you would do requirements for this, then you would do design, then you would do development, then only you would do testing. So first requirements for all the 7 might have taken us, let's say, I'll take it as 2 months, okay, or let's keep it simple, let's keep it 1 month. Right, 1 month for requirements, 1 month for design, 1 month for development, and 1 month for testing. Okay, so for developing these features, you would have spent some 4 months to complete this in a waterfall model. Okay, but Agile doesn't work that way. What it does is it will keep everybody busy. Right? So it's not like only after all your requirements are signed off I'll do the design. That's not the approach what Agile or Scrum model would take. What it does is it will pick up one requirement. Right? So the BA will pick up one requirement. Right? Then you would complete it. Right? So then the technical architect, right? So you'll say, so the requirement is completed from completely documented, right? So then, if you look at it, he would have to do it for 7 of them. Okay, so ideally you would have done these 7 requirements. Then the technical architect would have started here. Right? So the design for this 7 would have started here, and it would have gone like this. Right? So 7. Let's say 7 into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So this was taking us a month, and this is another taking another month. Right? So that was assumption in a waterfall model. But in Agile, what we do is we'll not wait till all your requirements are captured. So the architect, rather than starting from here, he would start from here. Right? On the next day, as and when the requirement is completed, he will start designing it. Right? So this would be, let's say, 1, 2, 3, up to 7. So he would, instead of starting the requirement 1 here, after requirement 7 is completed, he'll start right it here. So this means both of them are busy. Nobody is sitting idle in the project. Right? So while you are capturing the requirement 2, Architect is designing for requirement 1. Similarly, the programmers, right, they would start it from here. Right, so you would start requirement 1, while the technical architect would work on requirement 2. Right. So, and then let's say tester. Right. So while the architect is working on 4, requirement 4, right. So while the business analyst is working on requirement 4, architect would work on requirement 3, programmer would work on requirement 2, right, and tester work on requirement 1. Right. So this way, you're reducing it from 4 months to maybe 1 month, 2 weeks or so, right? Since nobody is sitting idle in this process. You get the benefit out of this. You understand what is the benefit out of this model. So we are moving it from a sequential model to simultaneous model now. So instead of having it in 7, complete all your requirements and then move to analysis and design, you are doing it one requirement at a time. So this is the approach which is taken. Okay. Now ideally what would happen is the way it would work. So you will have a whiteboard like this, something like this, and then you'll place all those 7 requirements here. What you do is on a daily basis you'll have a meeting for 15 minutes every day at the start of the day. Okay, we call that as the DSM, daily stand-up meeting. Okay, so the Scrum Master would call for a daily stand-up meeting. Every day you will have this meeting, and it won't be more than 15-20 minutes. All you would discuss in that meeting is, what is it that I'm going to do for today? Every person in the group will say, okay, no, as a business analyst, let's say, I'll work on requirement 3. Architect would say I'll work on requirement 2, or whatever it is, right? So you're figuring out what they need to do for that particular day. Okay, so each person will clearly say that this is what I need, and he would also call the dependencies on the task. If you are dependent on some other person for something, then you will clearly say, I will do this task and I expect this to help from this person, right? So those are the 2 things which are covered in your daily stand-up meetings. Okay, then you would start doing the task. Okay, what you do ideally is, this is the list of all your user stories. So you'll pick one of them and then start your requirements. Okay, and then once it's complete, you'll pick the next one. You'll pick the next one and then start working on that second one, right? So all you're doing is, as and when you're done with your requirements, you're picking it from the list of the user stories which needs to be done, and then you're completing it and then placing it here. So that is how the you would continue your work, right? Now, as and when you finish your requirement, the architect would you'd mark it as like requirements complete, right? And then once your requirements are complete, then the architect would look, okay, requirements for 1 is complete. So then I'll pick it up and then do the design. So we'll complete the design and then capture it as design complete. Then the programmers would pick it up and then say, you know what, okay, design is also complete for this. So then let me do the development. Okay. So once everything is completed, then this would be moved to done. So which means all the phases of the project are complete, right? And whatever are work in progress, either be it in requirements or design or development or testing, are there in this tab, work in progress tab. Okay. So clear about this, what we're doing here. So if you look at a typical workboard, you'll have this to be features, right? Wherein all these have to be developed. Then you'll have a section on work in progress, wherein you're actually developing them, and then you have something what you have done. Right? So all the done ones are moved to the next side. Right. So these are all the user stories, and these are what you need to do for your user for this particular sprint. And then you are picking it up and then working in the in progress ones, which means these are already in progress. Either it could be requirements, design, or development, or testing, whatever it is, they are in progress. Then and then once everything is completed, then you will move it here, which means it is available for testing by the customer. Okay, so the sprint ends on this particular day, and whatever features are completed, even the testing is completed, you are moving it here. Okay, it's a very simple way. I mean, all you are doing is, instead of having a detailed document prepared everywhere, you're just using some post-it notes. So this could be like login screen, this could be like funds transfer, right? This could be like check account balance, right? And using these post-it notes to capture the details, and then requirements, you'll do the design, everything onto that post-it note. How do we do that? I'll explain it, but this is the overall process that you would follow. Okay, so that's the second step, where we are executing a sprint, right? So this iteration is called as a sprint, right? So once we identify those features, that would go through this sprint, where you do the design, development, testing, everything under this sprint, right? You have something called as a daily stand-up meetings, where you figure out what every person is going to do and then deliver it, right? By the time sprint is completed, you have all those features which are part of that sprint developed, and then you'll have this demo session. So some of them call it as show and tell, right? Or some of them call it as demo, right? So basically, you're figuring out, what all you're figuring out whether whatever is developed in this sprint is good enough, or if there is any feedback, then it goes into your reprioritization of the sprint. Okay, and after some maybe 2-3 sprints, you'll feel that okay, now this is a decent version which the team can use. They'll give it as a release. Okay, so release and sprint, so there's a difference between them, right? So there could be multiple sprints before you make a new release. Now we still need to understand, how do we as a business analyst capture the requirements? Okay, so what do we fill in that post-it note? Right, so that is basically our responsibility. We have to fill in all our details about the requirement in that post-it note, right? How do we do that? We do that using user stories. So a typical product backlog would look something like this. I think a couple of examples, let's look at it before we move ahead. Like, you have a user login, then you're browsing the shop, then you're adding stuff to your shopping cart, you're sharing it on social network, you're managing the stock, you're reaching out to the customers, and then there are some reporting, right? So all these are the features, or epics as we call it as. Then you'll break it down. You can log in by registering on the site, or you could log in by Facebook integration, or by Google integration, right? So all those you'll identify, and then you'll see which one is most important, and then keep it in those releases, right? So all those release 1, you have these features identified. Release 2, these are the features which are identified. So you'll figure this out, and then each release you'll go through that process of to be, and then work in progress and completed, so that you have the complete list of all status of all the user stories which are going on. Okay, so this is another example of an email application. So what you do, you organize email, you will manage email, you will manage your calendar, you will manage your contacts. So you can search your email by keyword, or one field, or more than one field. You can search the attachments as well, or the subfolders. So all these are like search options. And maybe you don't want all these options in the first release. The first release, I just want it by keyword. Only the text of the email is what I would search. Then I can combine more than one field, like from which person has that email come in, or which person it is sent to, and all those details, multiple fields I can search, right? Then I can search within the attachments, right? All those are coming up in future releases. Like searching the attachments, I'm putting it under the sprint 3, and then searching by keyword in sprint 1, right? So this prioritization happens. After that, as part of your each sprint, how are you going to capture the requirements? So broadly, our requirement would just be captured by that one single post-it note. Okay, you have to capture all your requirement about that particular feature using one postcard size post-it note. Okay, and usually it has these 3 parts: a description, wherein you'll figure out what it is going to do, a 1-2 liner generally. It basically tells what is the objective, what is your objective, what is it that you're trying to achieve using that description. The conversation talks about how your screen should look like, or what is the process flow, right? So it basically captures all the details about the requirement. Okay, it could be a flow chart, or it could be a wireframe, or it could be a series of steps. So the conversation can be, it's similar to your basic and alternate flows, everything combined. Right? So you're just having that small place to capture all those details. Then you have a confirmation. So confirmation is nothing but how do you validate that whatever functionality that you have specified in your description is delivered, right? So that's covered as confirmation, right? So these 3 parts are covered in a typical user story. Okay, so you have a user story that's captured using this post-it note, right? And that is done just using this piece of paper, and then you either write it down or whatever it is. And now there are some softwares, like there is a Rally, which you can Rally software which you can use to capture all your requirements in user stories. Right? We'll look at that tomorrow as well, right? So broadly, all you'll get is this postcard size note to capture your requirement, right? And it has only these 3 sections: a description, a conversation, and a confirmation. Okay, I'll explain that in tomorrow's session, so that we have that continuity. But broadly, this is how we would go about capturing the requirement. Any questions?
No, not much.
Okay, so I'd suggest review this if you are getting into any of these clients which are working in an agile mode. You tend to capture the requirements in this way. Now, this is not the mainstream way of capturing requirements, but it could be in the next 2-3 years, right? So this is a very upcoming, most promising way of executing the projects these days. A lot of companies are experimenting with this agile way, right? Scrum model, right? So generally, most of the teams have that expectation that we need to understand agile and they would have worked in agile projects. So this is a different way of there is no BRD, there is no change management process, nothing else, right? So you're free to make your changes to the requirements. The team is empowered; they can take their decisions and all, right? So much faster, because you're doing things simultaneously rather than sequentially, and it saves you on time and money, definitely. Right? How do we capture the requirements, and then how do we use that Rally software and all? I'll cover it in tomorrow's session. So by tomorrow we should be clear with how to go about the requirements in a user story. Okay.
But for this, like for the user stories to be captured, like everybody needs to be at that place, like present at that place, and
Yes.
put this post to its notes, right?
Yes. So that's the main reason, on-site offshore model is a little challenging in agile projects, right? Still companies are figuring out how to do it, but most of the projects which are done in agile are actually based out of one single room. Right? So they are not even in multiple offices. They tend to have one single room, and everybody sits in that room.